We're doing a Gothic review of Christopher Golden's The Road of Bones. I picked this book up in early January and started reading it because Christopher Golden was coming out with The House of Last Resort this year. I kind of wanted a taste of something else he'd done on Kindle Unlimited before deciding whether or not to pay for this newest book. And while reading it, I realized that The Road of Bones and everything else that Christopher Golden's written is under St. Martin's Press. And at the time, there was a social media boycott of St. Martin's Press. This past August, St. Martin's Press finally came out with a statement addressing the social media boycott. Opinions are varied on their statement and whether or not they met the core demands of the boycott. I think everything they could meet in those original demands they did meet. Now, they did take so long to say anything, and what they said was so kind of like milquetoast and non-committal that I understand why people aren't satisfied and why they might be continuing their boycott. I have personally decided my boycott is over because they address the minimum demands, and to be honest, I didn't ever even expect them to do that. And I know that there are a lot of authors who are behind the scenes pushing for St. Martin's Press to do this, and I think not acknowledging that they met the minimum demands puts those authors in kind of a tough spot because St. Martin's Press went along with them, said something when they could have done nothing. So if you don't, give them a little bit something back, what they learn is not to meet anyone halfway or attempt to compromise or address. Like, remaining silent versus saying something gets them pretty much the same thing, and it's less effort for them to do nothing and punish anyone who tries to change things. Additionally, I did sort of promise myself that once the boycott was over, I would do a Gothic review for The Road of Bones. I just really had a good time with it and wanted to talk about it. It's literally the only book I read from St. Martin's Press this year, partially because once I realized I couldn't talk about the books, I found it frustrating to read them, and partially because I don't read a lot of St. Martin's Press to start. I think how I'm going to handle things going forward in the future is looking for diverse voices from St. Martin's Press and reading those books and reviewing them. As far as I can tell, Christopher Golden isn't really a diverse voice, but because I've already read it and I have a script written out for it, I am going to go ahead and film it. And ironically enough, this is a great winter horror read because Road of Bones is literally set in Russia in a real life place, which is the Road of Bones, or like this highway that's built in a remote area of Russia. It was done by forced slave labor where people were dying as they were building the road, and they just paved over those bodies and kept going and making the road, which, as you might imagine, gives this author a lot of lore and inherent creepiness just to start with, and I think makes it a perfect winter Gothic read. These Gothic reviews where I have 9 different Gothic elements I score for, and a book only needs 3 to qualify. Let's go ahead and break it down, starting with elements of horror. There's several layers of horror here in The Road of Bones. We'll start just with like the extremity of this certain place where being outside, even for a limited amount of time, could easily kill you even with all of the appropriate winter gear. They're doing this like haunted show, extreme places to be on filming, and they had to hire a guide, and how they're getting along or not getting along with the guide is also part of like what is potentially eerie and concerning, because it's like you've got to get along with these locals and you've got to film a show and you have these preconceived notions that are being challenged, and you want to be open to that, but you also want to make sure you're telling the story that people will buy and pay to see. And all of that is true before things go horribly wrong and there's a monster that they're running from. Very atmospheric and creepy from the jump, and it just continues to build from there. Next is character is king, and I wasn't personally feeling the character is king element, but I do think the story is driven by character arcs and journeys. These specific characters are reacting to their emotion and their own personal experiences and making decisions informed on that. That's really driving the thrust of the plot. I think the whole book would have gone in an entirely different direction with a different cast, so I would have to give this the Gothic point. I mean, Teague's whole reason for being here is so that he can prove the supernatural, and with that proof, perhaps one day be able to see his dead sister again. And as he feels personally responsible for her war, abduction, torture, and death, he takes on extra responsibility for those around him and extra desire to protect them, which comes into play in what decisions he makes when faced with something that he can't defeat. And Nara's big thing is her desire to be free from her family. And when push comes to shove, she chooses herself. And sticking the two of them together, running away from this supernatural thing, is quite entertaining because they have opposite instincts and opposite drives that are always sort of like at odds with each other. As just one more element the two of them have to battle when they're trying to survive. More poetic prose. I think there are some poetic elements within this story. Like, Teague and his friend do speak in a more terse manner. They're often talking over each other. But there is like this poetic romanticization of the two of them traveling together at the edge of the world. Like, this pull to see and experience something that's barely survivable feels a little bit like that draw to the quote-unquote bad boy. Like, you know it's not good for you, but that dangerous, dark element is compelling. We're very much getting that same kind of love and attraction on the Road of Bones for them to experience and learn about. And I do think there's like some flowing speculative poetry once we get past these character intros and get into the inciting incident, what they're running from, why they're running from it, what they can do about it, and all of the wild speculation about what it is all come down to being like pretty poetic and lyrical and like have this folkloric, almost dreamlike quality woven in. Elements of loneliness and longing, the sheer isolation of living anywhere in these remote towns along the Road of Bones, perhaps one of the most isolated places in the world, it feels like, and like one of the most extreme places in the world that you could try to survive. It almost reminds me of like life in a spaceship. Like, you're in the town or you're in the car, and if the generator in the town stops working or something in the car breaks down, you're just there in the void and gonna die out there. Like, it reminds me of 30 Days of Night in a lot of ways, where the supernatural something takes over the town and now we have to survive not just the supernatural, but like the weather and all of the elements battling against us too. Delving into human mortality. The Road of Bones is a highway literally built on the dead bodies of the slaves forced to build the road. It's morbid, it's awful, it's historically accurate. Literally existing on top of corpses. The Siberian cold is so intense that people die of exposure within minutes. There's a lot of precautions, there's special gear. The area is so isolated that if someone gets injured, and quite a few people are physically injured throughout the chaos of this particular book, they're hours and hours and hours away from medical attention, and things that you could, drive 30 minutes in a hospital could get taken care of right away are killing people off left and right, and they're leaving people they could have otherwise saved for dead behind. And then on top of that, we have like the supernatural something, which is the Parni in this case, and comparing this like human frailty, this like small blink and you miss it life moment, to the immortality of the Parni and their desires, their ability to survive, the way they view this environment. The supernatural element, so we introduce the Parni and like this mythic lore element, I think, in the back third. Like, there's something that's chasing them and we're not 100% sure what it is. We're sort of led to believe that it's supernatural, especially with the way it's taking certain people and creatures over, but it becomes very clear and very dreamlike in this back third that the Parni are real, that this is a thing that's happening, and that it is a supernatural, larger forces at work kind of moment. Questioning a character's mental health and reality, Teague very briefly has this moment where he questions his own mental sanity and clarity. I don't really feel like it counts because so much has happened at that point in time that like the reader knows that Teague is fine and his clarity is fine. What's happening is just beyond explanation. Makes use of local folklore, superstition, and myth. Just yes. Setting this up on the Road of Bones, talking about the macabre nature of how this road comes to exist and what that realistically meant for the people of the area. I looked up the Parni, where that like originated from, and that's also like a traditional Siberian kind of myth an element. I love learning about these elements. I love seeing them for the first time in a story. I just think it wove it all together really well, and it was very thoughtful about like each individual survival component and trying to make it feel like we're authentically in a place and getting a little slice of it. Which brings me into Strong Sense of Place. And again, this unique place really felt like its own. The Parni are kind of like these nature spirits that are connected to the land and are woven into it. What they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it is part of the place, and like is literally a physical manifestation of the natural world, the world around it, their response to the Road of Bones and humans encroaching on their land. It's really good. It's got like this nature element, it's got this man versus environment kind of element. It's got the human versus supernatural. It's got like questions about good and bad. I just really liked The Road of Bones. I thought it was horrific and like in a thriller, gripping kind of way, as well as like a gothic horror. It's really well written. It goes from like this more mundane, here, there focus to like this more wild, speculative, dreaming element. It was a really good time, and obviously it's full of snow, so I think it's perfect to pick it up this time of year. That's gonna be my gothic review of The Road of Bones by Christopher Golden. Have you guys read this book or anything else by Christopher Golden? Let me know in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading.